Internal Revenue Service IRS Tax Tip. What taxpayers should do if they get a letter or notice from the IRS. IRS Tax Tips 2020-95, August 3rd, 2020. Every year, the IRS mails letters or notices to taxpayers for many different reasons. Here are some do's and don'ts for taxpayers who receive one. Don't ignore it. Most IRS letters and notices are about federal tax returns or tax accounts. Each notice deals with a specific issue and includes specific instructions on what to do. So if you get a letter from the IRS, most people are a little intimidated by the letter, possibly, and you possibly might ignore the letter, but you want to look over the letter. You want to be in correspondence with the IRS, even if you owe money or something like that, because if you're in good correspondence, you're more likely to be in a position where you can kind of negotiate and get the best, deal you can with the IRS, even if you owe money for them. If you ignore the letters, you'll typically, receive follow-up letters with it. The IRS is a bureaucratic agency, so that's going, they usually give you a letter, give you 30 days to respond to it or something like that. May then send a follow-up letter and so on and so forth. But if you don't respond to the letters, it's going to be more difficult to basically negotiate with them when the time comes that you will have to respond, which will take place at some point. If you do owe money, then at some point, then if you don't respond, then collection action could proceed from that point in time as well. Whereas if you do respond, then you can typically set up a better arrangement to go forward with. So back to the text. Don't panic. The IRS and its authorized private collection agencies do send letters by mail. Most of the time, all the taxpayers needs to do is read the letter carefully and take the appropriate action. So typically, you're going to get the letter. Most of the times, a lot of the times, the IRS will correspond through letter. They're going to be a bureaucratic agency. Typically, what will happen is that, you're not typically going to get a phone call or anything like that and threatening immediate action. You got to do something immediately and give them some information. They're typically going to give you a letter and say, hey, this is what you need to do. This is what we have. We have you 30 days to respond. Please get back to us. And then they send up a follow-up letter and so on and so forth. So you typically will get the correspondence oftentimes with mail if the IRS has an issue with it and you just want to, read it carefully and go over it. And then if you have, of course, a tax professional to help you out with it, then you can take it to them as well. Back to the text. Don't reply unless instructed to do so. There is usually no need for taxpayers to reply to a notice unless specifically instructed to do so. On the other hand, taxpayers who owe should reply with a payment. IRS.gov has information about payment options. So a lot of times, you might have just an informational letter from the IRS, which is just going to give you information. No need to reply to that. But a lot of times, if you owe money, then the IRS letter will be telling you, here's what you owe, and they might be giving you kind of a breakdown as to why you owe the money, right? And then obviously they want a payment of some kind, and there's payment options here. So you could take a look at the payment options. There's a link to that here, linked to this in the description. If you can't make a payment, then you still want to correspond with the IRS and possibly set up an installment agreement. That's typically the general next step that you would have, or possibly go to something other than that, like an offer and compromise. But you would like to do this earlier rather than later so that you're in correspondence with the IRS. If you send in, an offer and compromise, or if you were to send in requesting some type of payment plan, even if they don't accept it, if the IRS doesn't accept it, then the correspondence will still proceed forward, right? And then they'll give you another letter saying, well, we didn't accept whatever that offer was, and you're still, kind of in good standing because you're talking to them, corresponding with them. Whereas if you ignore them, they may go to collection action. Now, note, obviously, when you're corresponding with them, if you owe them money, the interest and penalty could still accumulate upwards. But you don't want to just ignore that fact, or else they might, take the next step, which would be going towards some type of collection action. So back to the text. Do take timely action. A notice may reference changes to a taxpayer's account, taxes owed, or payment request, or a specific issue on a tax return. Acting timely could minimize additional interest and penalty charges. So again, you want to take the action sooner rather than later. Typically, you got 30 days to respond to a normal kind of letter. You want to respond to them. You want to be, in communication with them if they're requesting action to be taken. Do review the information. If a letter is about a change or corrected tax return, the taxpayer should review the information and compare it with the original return. So oftentimes if you send in a return and they say, oh, well, what if you didn't pick up a 1099 or something like that, and the IRS got it on their side, or a W-2 for a small job you had for a couple weeks or something like that, and you didn't put it on the tax return, IRS is going to say, hey, you missed this W-2. They can pick that kind of thing up automatically because remember, these types of documents, 1099s, W-2s, the reason the employer is giving them to you at all is because the IRS has compelled them to do so, and they will receive one too, meaning the IRS is going to get that information as well. So therefore, when you do a lot of your information, just normal kind of standard tax return information, W-2s, 1099s, the IRS can match those things up electronically, So if you miss one of those things, the IRS is going to quite easily say, hey, look, we got this W-2 that you didn't put on there, and then they can easily calculate the difference in the taxes due to the W-2, and they'll typically send you out a letter, and then you want to check that and say, oh yeah, most likely you're going to say, oh yeah, I missed that W-2 that I worked there for 2 weeks, and then you make the change and you say, okay, you're right, IRS, and give them, money that they're going to want for the change in the taxes. Every once in a while, they could actually change the taxes down, so they could match it up if you miskeyed something on a W-2 and you claim too much income. They could catch that too, and they may actually do that. Send you a letter and say, hey, you overstated this thing and you paid us too much. I wouldn't rely on the IRS to do that, but it can happen. So back to the text. If the taxpayer agrees, they should make notices about the corrections on their personal copy of the tax return and keep it for their records. So typically when this happens, they're going to say, hey, do you agree with this change? We got this W-2 that you didn't put on there. We think you owe us a little bit, more money and whatnot. Do you agree with it? Because they need your consent, because the point of doing the tax return is that the people are reporting their own income, even though the IRS knows what, a lot of the information behind the tax return. So basically you have to agree to it. And then, so you need to respond to the letter and say, yeah, I agree to that, and then correct your taxes on your end, so any rollovers or anything will roll forward correctly to the next time period, and you can move forward with that. So, in other words, the tax return, the IRS basically will possibly know, what the correction is, but they need your approval to basically to solidify whatever that change will be typically. So back to the text. Do respond to a disputed notice. Do respond to a disputed notice. If a taxpayer doesn't agree with the IRS, they should mail a letter explaining why they dispute the notice. So you might get a letter and they take a position, the IRS takes a position and says, hey, you owe us more money based on this 1099. And you might just be like, yeah, but that 1099 was issued, incorrectly. The person who issued it was wrong or something like that. I'm just going to ignore it because the IRS is wrong about that. That shouldn't be something that I have to deal with. Well, you can't just ignore it because the IRS is going to say, hey, we got this 1099, even though the taxpayer needs to be the one that's reporting the income, right? They're the one responsible for it. The IRS is going to argue that one, something like that, oftentimes, for sure, right? The fact that they sent you a letter means that they're disputing an item on the tax return. So if you just ignore it because you're like, I'm right, I'm not even going to respond to them, then they're just going to send you another letter. and if you keep ignoring them, they could go to collection action. So what you want to do is respond and say, hey, look, this 1099 was incorrectly processed, and then what do you want me to do about it because it's wrong, or something like that. And then you got to go, then you keep moving forward from there. So back to the text. They should mail it to the address on the contact stub included with the notice. The taxpayer should include information and documents for the IRS to review when considering the dispute. People should allow at least 30 days for the IRS to respond. So remember, when you're dealing with the IRS, bureaucratic agency here. So, if you're disputing something, you're going to say, hey, if the 1099 was wrong, you're going to say, hey, the 1099 is wrong. Here's why. Here's the documentation I have for it. You're going to send it back in. 30 days later, they might send something back saying, yeah, but this, that, and the other thing, and we'd like more evidence of this or that. and then you'll send in whatever more evidence, and then 30 days later. So it could take a while to get things processed. But again, as long as you're in good faith process going through this, it's going to at least stop them from just taking collection action, possibly. That could happen if you just basically ignore the letter. So back to the text. Do remember there's usually no need to call the IRS. If a taxpayer must contact the IRS by phone, they should use the number in the upper right-hand corner of the notice. The taxpayer should have a copy of the tax return and letter when calling the agency. So usually, the letter's pretty self-explanatory, so you can kind of figure out what they're doing. They're usually fairly detailed with it. But if you do need to call the IRS, you want to call the number on the letter typically, and you want to have the letter in front of you because you want to be able to reference the date and the reference number of the letter so that the IRS can pull it up in their system and address whatever concerns you have. Obviously, the telephone is a bit down on the IRS, so if it's just a general type of thing and you call the general number to the IRS, it may take longer. The IRS is trying to kind of mitigate or lessen the phone calling that's happening at this point. Back to the text. Do avoid scams. The IRS will never contact a taxpayer using social media or text messages. The first contact from the IRS usually comes in the mail. Taxpayers who are unsure if they owe money to the IRS can view their tax account information on IRS.gov. There's also a link to the tax account information here. So typically, if you get a letter from the IRS by mail and it's got the little stamp that's in the IRS in the upper left-hand corner, and whatnot, and that's usually the way the IRS will contact, at least on the preliminary contact. They're not going to contact by text messages and emails, and they're certainly not going to be asking for immediate information. You got to give me like tomorrow in order to process a refund, or threatening, a threatening type of thing that you have to do, take immediate action or this will happen. So, because usually they're going to give you a letter and say, hey, respond in 30 days, and then, we're going to put a lien on your thing and within 30 days if you don't respond, and so on. So, if you have a question about it, however, then of course you want to go to the IRS website directly. So if you get some letter where you're questionable about it, you're like, is this an IRS letter? It doesn't look like I'm not sure this is a letter from the IRS. Then maybe you want to go to the website directly, the IRS.gov website, and then check it directly from the source. And if you get any kind of emails or text messages, you can be confident that those aren't the IRS. But if you want to check them again, don't respond to the email or text message, because then you're going to talk to a scam artist. Right? You want to talk to the IRS. So then go directly to the IRS.gov to follow up on any kind of information you need to do. So there's more information and links to more information about this as well. There'll be a link to this in the description.